What's up, guys? If you probably clicked on this video, you're probably thinking, am I a slave? Am I a prisoner to weed? So I just wanted to briefly go into this conversation. I am a ex-slave of weed or cannabis or Mary Jane, whatever you want to call her. So I'm just sharing my experience as an ex-weed head. Maybe you guys can relate, maybe you can't, maybe I'm just silly, whatever. So I'll start off by saying that you can really become a slave to anything, and I think the first mistake a lot of times we make is thinking we are smarter than our substances. You know, surprisingly, me starting this channel, I didn't realize that weed was such a controversial topic. Some people say, is it addictive? Is it not addictive? It's not a drug. It's medicinal. It's better than alcohol. It's not alcohol. Just quit. The opinions are endless, but I would say weed is definitely addictive. But I would say anything can become addictive if you allow it to, whether it's food, whether it's weed, whether it's alcohol, whether it's gambling, whether it's shopping, whether it's your phone, whether it's porn, whether it's caffeine, anything, whether it's water, whether it's a person. Anything has the possibility to become addictive, especially if you have addictive traits or addictive personality. And not so much mean you're just prone to be a crackhead or alcoholic, but more so when you do things you can't stop. You get so involved in whatever you're doing, whether it's work, whether it's a substance, whether it's a person, whether it's a hobby or adventure. People like me, people like you, maybe, possibly, who have these addictive traits can sometimes fall into a spiral of getting too involved, getting too tied to a particular or said thing. So I think we have to acknowledge that anything has the possibility to become addictive. Now, especially weed. And I think weed in particular is very tricky because most people know that things like alcohol is addictive. People know that porn is addictive. People know that crack or heroin or other drugs or other pills or narcotics are addictive. But for whatever reason, weed is in this area where it's like half and half. Some say it's not, some say it is. And I'm like, clearly weed is addictive. They'll say, well, you know, it's a mental thing, unlike alcohol or other drugs. You know, they're physical. And in list of addictions, the majority of them are physical. I would say before alcohol becomes physical, it starts off as a mental thing. You mentally feel like you need it, and eventually it does become physically addictive. Whereas weed just stays a mental thing the whole time. But for whatever reason, people say, use the stupid comment that it's a mental thing, so long as it's not physically addictive, it's not really addictive. What about, like I said, porn or gambling or shopping or your phone? These things are also all mental and not physical. So why does weed, you know, they make weed this different thing? I don't get it. So weed is tricky because, you know, on paper or just at its root, weed is not a bad thing. It is a plant. It is a herb. It is a natural medicinal herb which can be used for anxiety. It can cure various illnesses. It can help with sleep or help with immune issues or help with hunger if you're sick, trying to get your appetite back. Weed can be used for good in its base nature. But the issue is with people, we tend to abuse weed. This channel is made for people who want help with weed addiction. Not just anybody who smokes weed, but people who are tied to weed and can't seem to quit. Again, weed itself is not bad. It is medicinal. It can be used for good. But when we use it every day, all day, on a consistent basis, we kind of have fell into the cycle of addiction And a lot of times we don't like to admit that we're addicted to weed. We'll say, I'm not addicted. I can quit anytime I want to. I don't want to quit. Well, why don't you want to quit? You should never be in a position where you feel like you need something from day to day. So how did I become a slave or a prisoner to weed? So I started like most people who smoke, maybe not most, but a lot. I'll say at least half, where you're in high school, you're with your friends. It's more of a social thing, a weekend drug, a party drug, just something to have fun. And by the time I would say 19, possibly 18. I would say by the time I was 18, I smoked weed every day. And I smoked weed every day for a good 15 to 16 years straight. And I would always say that, I'm not addicted. I can quit when I want to. I just don't want to quit. I always planned to quit when I was in my 40s or my 50s or my 60s, when I clearly see people who smoke that long usually get to that age and they don't quit. So, that's not the best plan to approach trying to quit weed, saying I'll quit when it's so embedded in me, when I'm like an old prune. But anyway, I got to a point where I did need weed every day. If I woke up, I smoked. I smoked before I went to work, smoked before I ate, smoked when I got off work, smoked on my lunch break, smoked before I went to sleep, and wake up, and the cycle repeats itself. And I would find myself, when I wasn't able to get weed, I would, even if I still had a small amount of weed left and I couldn't get a refill, I'm going into anxiety like, oh, what if I don't have weed tomorrow? And if I did find myself in that position, the day would be so hard. I also began to allow weed to dictate my appetite. I did not get hungry unless I smoked weed first. And like most weed heads, we treat weed as this good thing, this friend, this thing to just make life go by easy, when we don't realize we have become quite addicted to it. So I was at a point where I needed weed to eat. I needed weed just to get by the day's time. I needed weed just like I needed a glass of water. Most people who, weed was so ingrained to my life. My friends smoked weed. My mother smoked weed. Everybody around me that was in my personal life consumed weed. So it was this thing that connected everybody around me. And even if it, I also say, when you get to a point where you begin to do a substance by yourself, you're addicted. I still drink alcohol, but I drink alcohol on date nights with my wife, just as a libation to have a good time, make the most of our night free of children. Now, I would not at this point in my life, and probably really never ever, just was at home alone and have a drink. That's sad. I don't want to drink by myself. It's lonely. But I never had the issue with weed. And some people may feel the way with weed. They may feel like it's a social drug. I'll smoke with people, but I wouldn't smoke by myself. I could smoke with people and definitely smoke by myself. I had no issue with smoking by myself. And when we get to a point where we can do our said thing by ourselves and it's no longer a social thing, we probably have fell into the cycle of addiction without knowing it. So then I got to a point in life where I did realize that I'm addicted to weed. It took me a long time to finally admit that I have an issue with weed, where I kind of want to stop, but I can't stop. I try to stop for a few days. I reward myself, and before I know it, I'm back smoking every day. The cycle could not stop. I wanted to stop, and I could not. And when you get to a point where when you know something is bad for you, you know something is not to your benefit, but you still continue to do it, you have become a slave to that said thing or that said substance. So I was at a point where I wanted to quit. I felt guilty by smoking. I would smoke weed, get high, have some good thoughts for a while, and be like, I suck, I should quit, I shouldn't need weed to get through my day, but I still can't stop. But I got to a point where I admitted to myself that I was addictive, that I wanted better for myself, and I'm going to put my foot down and not let this thing control my life. Because a lot of times we feel like if we have to quit something, our life is like in shambles. Like if you're alcoholic or if you're on hard drugs, your life is pretty much out of control or at its lowest point. Whereas weed, you usually don't get to your lowest point smoking weed. Usually there's something else that's causing you to be low, and you're using weed just to cope with that. But weed can also keep you in that low point because it just makes you make good out of it and don't actually make any effort to actually change. So weed never takes you to a low point, but because it's not as harsh, it's not as destructive as alcohol or other drugs, it's harder to actually quit. So you get to a point where you're doing it every day, all day, like myself, and you have a hard time actually letting it go. But I made up in my mind that I did not want to be controlled by weed. I don't want to wake up feeling like I need weed. I don't want to feel like I have to smoke weed in order to eat. I'm like, weed is controlling too much of my life. I don't want to be a slave to anything, especially a drug. I can be a slave to my marriage, or be a slave to God, or be a slave to my children. But something like a substance and weed, where I feel like I needed to live, even though it's not tearing my life up, it's a problem that I feel like I need this said thing to survive. So I made up in my mind that I was not going to be tied down by weed. I was not going to let it control my life, control how I feel, control how I process my emotions, control how I eat, control how I sleep, control how I deal with people. I wanted to be the master of my mind, my emotions, and be able to practice and gain self-control. Because a lot of time also with us being a slave to weed, we're being a slave to it because we have lost so much self-control, so much self-discipline, that we will let something as small as weed control our lives. So I made up in my mind that that wasn't going to be a thing. I was going to be my own person, make my own decisions, and be able to lean on my own mind, on my own thoughts, and not let it be persuaded by weed or whatnot. So through a process of me winging myself off and going weeks without smoking and picking back up, I finally did come to I came to a point where I did part ways with weed for good. And the feeling was great that I no longer had the need to feel like I needed it to wake up, to enjoy myself, to socialize, to be around people, to work. It's freeing to just live life and not actually need some external source or some external factor to dictate how you process life throughout today. We will use weed a lot of times to say it helps me think better, it helps me deal with anxiety, it helps me yada yada yada. Okay, that's fine if it helps you get over these humps for a short period of time. But when we allow weed to stay in our lives and allow it to continue to have control over us and to where we needed to do any and everything, it has become a problem. So if you're going through this and you're like, is it bad? Am I addicted? Am I a slave to it? If you're going with that back and forth in your head, you probably are. And I want to encourage you that, it doesn't all the time happen overnight. I didn't decide that I was going to quit one day and I just quit weed for forever. It took me a year process to fully let it go completely. But if you're going back and forth in your mind, whether you are tied to it, whether you're addicted, whether you're a slave to it, you probably are. So if you need help, if you want other content dedicated to, who is that? want other content dedicated to weed addiction and getting through it, check out some more videos on this channel. Maybe you're going through the same thing, maybe you're not, maybe as they say, maybe you're just weak because, you know, just quit weed. Whatever the case, comment below. I would like to know. So until next time, guys, like, subscribe, share. Most importantly, comment below, and remember, we are all in this together. Peace.